Welcome everybody, welcome to the second Google Hangout at the Learning Technologies Summer Forum. And I hope there are a lot of people watching in. If there aren't, I know one person for absolute certainty is watching, and that's Con Stodidis in Melbourne, Australia. Con has been hanging around doing all of the periscopes and all of the Google Hangouts and getting the Twitter feed for this conference. So Con, welcome. I hope you're getting something out of it. My name's Nigel Paine. I'm going to chair this session, and I'm joined by Andrew Jacobs. Andrew is all things learning and development, OD and talent at the London Borough of Lewisham. His badge says that he's a management manager. It actually says talent management manager, but I actually prefer to see him as a management manager. I think that sums him up brilliantly. So this is about strategy, and my first question, my obvious question, Andrew, is should strategy be putting its front foot forward? Is it putting its front foot forward?
Thanks, Nigel. Yes, it should be putting its front foot forward. If you haven't got a clear strategy as to why you're doing stuff, you're very much like the Tasmanian devil. Lots of activity that's being undertaken, but no direction. And you're going to ping about from one place to the other without having clear guidelines as to what's expected. Is it doing it? In part. I think we have a strategy around delivery, and that's prevalent across the industry, so we know how we want to deliver things. But do we have a strategy around thinking and the benefit behind it? That I'm not so sure of.
Yeah. Okay. So if we've got a strategy around delivery and we haven't got a strategy around thinking and benefit, how do we begin to develop that?
First things first. Excuse me. First things first, I think we need to step back.
Sorry, Con.
We need to step back. We need to actually consider what's the value of our function. What are we doing? Because as long as we continue with the shopkeeper mentality of providing things and providing stuff and having strategies for delivery, we are still just doing stuff. We are not fundamentally looking at what the business offers, or what we can offer the business rather, not fundamentally looking at how we can develop support for the business. All we're going to do is just more things. So the first thing to do is to stop and step back.
Okay.
Take a step back and see what we're actually, the purpose of our function.
So if we're not a shopkeeper, that's a good metaphor. Here we are, what would you like? Oh, you can have one of those, you can have one of those. If that's obsolete, what is the metaphor? What should we be if we're not a shopkeeper?
We should be engineers.
Right, okay.
We should be engineers.
Experts? No?
Not necessarily experts, no, engineers. Engineers know where, no, it's true. Engineers know where to find the right answer. Engineers don't stock every resource they need. Engineers know the people to go and get. And so it's being that connector and having a connectivist attitude where we bring people in as we need to, and knowing which resources to use and the right time to use them. Yeah.
And engineers are people you trust. Engineers are people you go into and you say, there's something not right, but I don't quite know what to do and how to fix it. What would you recommend?
Absolutely. I had this exact experience this week. I ride a motor scooter. It's brilliant. Gets me around town really easily. And it stopped working. I looked up on Google to see if I could find out what caused it. And I had a few clues. I could have tried to fix it myself. I don't know how long it would have lasted for. I could have taken it to a shop, bought the pieces and the parts in order to fix it. What I did is I booked in to go and see my mechanic. She reviewed it, she identified what she felt the issue was, and she also pointed out other things that I needed to do in order that I would, make the scooter still run in the future. And that's how we need to think, rather than just being the shopkeeper going, you need this part. Person goes away, tries to fix it, comes back, that didn't work. All right, try this part, and just constantly feeding into this cycle of further delivery.
Because shopkeepers can be disintermediated. We can go direct, we can buy online. Engineers, it's highly unlikely that you will find rent an engineer or a Google, YouTube or anything else that will deal with it. You're dealing with someone who understands your issues, works with you to be clear that you actually understand your own issues, and then starts to make recommendations for solutions.
Absolutely, and we can see this in the online world. We can see this in terms of the online delivery for learning, but also in terms of online shopping. Yeah, I can go onto Amazon and I can buy everything I need now. I can go online and purchase things without having to go to a shop for that now. And that's going to happen in the workplace as well.
Yes.
You're going to find that your managers and you're going to find your workforce are going off and getting the stuff they need without taking it through you.
Yeah.
That's not to say L&D needs to be there to do that. Get out the way. Don't stop people doing that stuff. Help them do that stuff. Give them the processes and the platforms and the systems to enable them to do that. Give them permission to do it. Let them do that stuff. That's not L&D's job. We are not the police. Our job is not to stop stuff happening. It's to help people find the right stuff in order they can perform better.
So let's be disintermediated. Let's not stand there at the shop and say, yes, can I help you? Yes, you can have one of those. Or, oh, I think you'd like 2 of those. Or there's a discount if you buy 2.
Absolutely.
Let's start having a much more, I would say, and tell me if I'm right, I would say, let's start having a much more adult conversation with the business and not a kind of servant-master conversation with the business.
Yeah, it's a parent-child relationship. You know, you think you know what's best, we will tell you what's best for you. That's not the case. We can't be like that anymore.
No, I agree with you. Okay, so you want to have this conversation. You understand the issues. You do want to be more like an engineer and less like a shopkeeper. How do you do that? How do you get strategy first and foremost in the equation?
Don't look at strategy first. If you try and drive a strategy through without taking some other factors into account, it won't work. You need to think of the nature of the relationships. Think of the structure that you have. Think of your relationships within your industry. Think of the relationships within your organization. Think of the relationships you have with your vendors. Think of with the market and so on. Think of your systems and processes. Look at the technology you already have. Think what you need to improve. But look at the processes that you've built behind it. There are lots of legacy systems that sit within learning and development that drive the way we do things. We can't change this because we spent an awful lot of money on it 20 years ago. And so we maintain those processes. Look at the skills you've got. Do you have the skills to be able to have those conversations? Do you have the skills in understanding data? Do you have the skills in being able to build relationships with people? Lastly, and probably most importantly, probably firstly, is what's the culture of your organization? What's the culture of your team? Does your team have an independent individual maturity to be all able to take this on? If they haven't, well, then you're not going to be able to move any strategy forward. Because you can design a strategy, put the relationships in place, build the systems and train them. If they don't want to do it, they won't do it.
So you got to think again. Now, Con has actually asked the question. So he is there. Very good, Con. The question is, so are we mechanics? We undertake fault identification and offer issue resolution. Wasn't quite what you were saying, really, was it? Mechanics isn't quite the metaphor, is it?
It's an interesting distinction. I'm glad you picked it up, Con, because it isn't about mechanics. Mechanics tend to work to process, whereas an engineer will look much more holistically wider than just a single process and a single part being broken. A mechanic you would go to fix a mechanism, i.e. a system and something that is a machine of some kind. We don't work within machines. We build the language of machines, but we're not mechanics. We're looking at from an engineer, so it's stepping back and looking much bigger picture.
Also, surely mechanics don't design anything. They don't really build anything. They fix things.
Mechanics repair.
Absolutely. Exactly.
There's a repair.
Engineers design. They think it through. They interpret. They listen to what you're saying and say, right, I think I understand. This kind of stuff, that kind of stuff. So it's an iterative process.
I think it's also interesting in the conversation we had in the session earlier on, much more being focused on an outcome. A mechanic will focus on an input, I hit this, an output, and this happened. Whereas an engineer will say, if you hit this at this degree, what's the later impact? You can let this run for 2 years, but in 2.5 years' time, it's going to stop. So the engineer will tend to step back and have a much longer view, whereas a mechanic will tend to be more in with what's happening.
Yes, I think that's good. Hope that's all right, Con. Let's change tack. Do you think strategy should be written down? Do you think it's a process of, 2-day away day, flip charts all around the room, go away, identify your key points and your measurable indicators? Is that what you see as the output of a strategy?
That's a good question. I think there is value and a part and a point in doing that, but that should be the catalyst in then taking things forward. What we assume, very much like we do in terms of course delivery, is that session is what builds our strategy. It doesn't. That starts the conversation about our strategy, and it's from that point it should then become more adaptive and it should become emergent, for want of another word. And so a strategy will emerge from the conversation that takes place, as opposed to being defined in that space. I think one of the issues we have is that if you're defining strategy in terms of learning and development, you're not building strategy. What you're doing is trying to make your work sound more important. If you just build a strategy for learning and development, it needs to be a business strategy. don't build a learning and development strategy because it has no value. The organisation will look at it and they will say, well, where's my IT strategy? Where's my finance strategy? Where's my facility strategy? And you just become a bit player. What you should be doing is looking at the organisation's business strategy and saying, how can I contribute to what the aims of the business are in the next 12, 18 months?
Yes, because there is a simple model of developing a strategy. If you like, take it from the away day idea, utterly isolated from the organisation, utterly isolated from anybody apart from the wishes, views, perspective of a very small group of people, out of a massively small subset of the organisation who think they know best. And that is not my definition of where strategy fits in.
What you're doing is you are getting out of the way, because for those 2 days when you're building that strategy,
stuff goes on.
Your business is going out there and they're doing things, and they're going to find better things and better ways of doing it than you think you can design it. So in terms of a design piece, your strategy should be built from what your organisation wants.
Exactly.
So what's the expectation? And then feeding into that is, what do my organisation want? The role and the art of the new L&D professional has to be about managing those conflicting demands.
So guys, move into a hotel. That's the way you can serve your organisation best. Get out of the way. So is there such a thing as an emerged strategy? You used the word emergent. Is it always going to be emergent because of that interaction, that constant attempt to understand the needs of the organisation at any moment as they evolve? And is there ever a sense that it's done, it's a done deal, or it stays like it is for the next year, 2 years, or whatever?
I think to a point it will always be emergent. The challenge is what we do is we build a date and say this has to be done by this date. And immediately then that makes it a list of tasks and a list of actions, a list of activities. Better will be to say milestone it. Say within 6 months, our aim is 2. Within 12 months, our target is 2. And build it on those terms. And then that way it can become an ongoing activity. And that way, it becomes more of what the organisation wants. You need to be able to reflect the needs of the business. And your business is going to stay the same in 12, 18 months, 2 years. So you need to demonstrate that you can be fluid in how that appears as well. So take time putting something together, but don't assume when it's done, it's done. That's the starting point to then how you continue to maintain that.
The new CEO of McDonald's made quite a long, I think it's about a 40-minute video in one of the shops. Very interesting that he chose that location, not in his corporate offices, to all McDonald's partners, franchisees around the world. And he said one thing that really struck me, out of many interesting things. He said the fundamental problem with McDonald's is that it was moving slower than the world in which it operated. And that's kind of equally true of L&D. If L&D moves slower than the organisation in which it's co-located, it is in serious trouble. Maybe not today, but certainly the day after and the next day.
Oh, completely. I think one of the challenges is that our thinking around learning development needs to be current and in the present. And for too long, we develop people within a learning development space based on the ideas of 10, 20, 30, 50 years ago. We'll just put things in context. You and I are both sitting here with a tablet in front of us. Tablets were unheard of 5 years ago. They were new technology. But what we're doing is we're using the technology and then applying it to our old thinking. And we need to be aware and say, well, actually, what thinking is relevant, accurate, and valid now? And that's where, in terms of emergent strategy, it needs to be in the present. Your strategy needs to reflect where you are now. And if your strategy doesn't reflect where you are now, and you're still relying on your former technology and your former thinking, then you're going to need to change that.
Example, the number of conversations I had with L&D developers saying, well, of course, tablets won't be part of our strategy. We develop in Flash. We've got 375 Flash movies. There's no way we're going to redo all of that. So basically, it's desktop, thank you very much. And what happened? People walked in with their tablets and said, I want to be connected, I want to do this. This became the vehicle. And suddenly, learning and development from asking the wrong question and giving the wrong answer to the right question ended up kind of marginalizing themselves. So people said, well, if your stuff is in Flash and it can't be on my tablet, to hell with you. I'll go somewhere else. I'll go find it myself, thank you. I actually saw some really good stuff on YouTube. It's much better than your rubbish on Flash. So you end up with disconnecting yourself from the organization. Absolutely. So the key view is to see the trend. There is a massive trend on BYOD, bring your own device into work. It's huge. It's going to be 80% of people in work will have their own devices by 2018. That's the kind of research figures. Now, The smart L&D person is saying, when our organization, how do we prepare for that? What do we need to do as a result? And that might really mean that everything you do has to be rethought and restructured in the light of it. That becomes a strategy to prepare for that new technology age.
And it also becomes emergent. That's the whole point.
It does.
It's not fixed in the date now.
It's
understanding where you're going to be in 6 months, a year's time, 2 years' time.
Exactly. So we've got another comment from Con. Con says, so what we really need are engineers with Ferraris.
Engineers with Ferraris?
I'm not sure of that either. I'm not sure of that, Con.
Having a Ferrari, how's that going to look across the business? No. Ferrari, I'm just thinking my journey to get here today, worst thing in the world would have been a Ferrari. It's about the right tool for the right job at the right time. And so it's not necessarily defaulting back to a particular way of doing things. You know, defaulting to a course option, defaulting to an e-learning course option, defaulting to a peer-to-peer solution, defaulting to an enterprise social network. You can't go to the things that you like doing. I mean, there's things I like doing in terms of design, but realistically, everything should start from a blank piece of paper.
Yes, yeah, I totally agree. What do we think about people with Ferraris? You know, maybe I'm unique in the world, but I don't necessarily warm and embrace them. And I don't feel any kind of co-relationship with people with Ferraris. And actually, having been in a Ferrari in my life, I can tell you, one, it was really uncomfortable. Two, it made me feel sick because the speed it went around bends. And three, I never want to go in another one. So I'm not sure about Ferraris. Okay, so we've talked about taking a strategy and writing it down or not writing it down. The next issue is, how do you communicate that strategy? If the only people who know about your strategy are your L&D team, ain't much of a strategy, I would argue. Would you agree?
Absolutely. So don't communicate your strategy in terms of your learning development language. Talk to the business in terms of their language. So it's asking, what do you want to do differently? How can I help you do things differently? How can I help you improve? And it's taking it away from the learning development language. As soon as you start talking courses and classes and workshops and curriculums and academies, people will, you know, their eyes will glaze over. You can see their eyes glaze over. If you continue to maintain the same language, people will always ask for the same thing. And this is why people assume that they want courses and classes. This is why managers assume that that's what they expect. So you have to change your language. If you don't change that, they will ask for the same thing.
And this is where strategy and tactics diverge, isn't it? That what you're trying to do is give people a vision of a different world and help them towards it. Not give them, not even a vision, give them a view of the existing world and deliver it, and then feel you're really satisfied.
That's what we need to do better. The tactics we need is the translating the strategy into action, but it's understanding that we are still moving in terms of the strategy. So it's not just translating it for the sake of doing it, but it's translating and saying, where are we aiming for? What's our target? Are we still on target? If I commission this piece, how is that going to impact on the strategy? And constantly taking it back to the strategy to make sure that it is relevant for the business. There is a danger that we become wind-up mice. We get wound up, off you go, and then we shoot off. But nobody ever comes back to say, well, is that what's needed? And some of the stuff we have around proving our worth and proving our relevance and return on investment is because we don't stop, pause, and go back to the strategy and say, is this what's relevant? Am I still relevant? I mean, we've done it ourselves. Commission something, so we commission it, and then 2 years later, it's still being scaled up, and hundreds of people are going on it, but no one's asking whether we're still getting the same value from it.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I remember in the BBC, people had run courses for like 12 years, same course. And when I said, maybe that's not exactly bang on in terms of relevance, the reply was, I always get 15 people. It's always full every year. And they fill in the form and tell me they really like it. So total lack of any concept of what you're doing for the organization. And I think if you ask that question of L&D, what are you doing for the organization? And if the answer is, well, we delivered 5 of that and 12 of that and 3 of that, wrong answer.
Input data, input and output data.
Yeah, it's about output. Data. And just how do you begin to measure that output then? What are ways that you will be happy in terms of that measurement?
Okay, so some of the things you can do is to give the management, and the measurement should be within the business. So part of the manager's role is to review the performance. The manager's role should be to review how the performance has improved.
Yeah.
So what have I done? I've read an ebook, I've been on a couple of webinars, I've done some coaching, I've done some comic books, I've sat in and shadowed somebody. I've done all these different things. What am I now doing differently as a result of it? That's not the learning function's job to measure that. That's the manager's job. The manager's job is to then feed back to the learning function and say, that webinar didn't work, the coaching was great, the ebook was great, etc. And then it's how we use that data within learning and development to then start targeting what's going to be appropriate solutions. Because the next person that comes to me, I can say, you might want to try the webinar, but I can't guarantee it. You might try this first. And it then becomes about how we can sequence support for people. And so it's relying on the management within the organisation to measure the performance, not about the L&D function.
But shouldn't it also be about impact? 6 months down the track, what do we notice that's changed in this place? What are we doing better?
Absolutely, and this is where the L&D professional can stand back and after having those hundreds of conversations with hundreds of managers, be able to piece together, I can prove that this has had a benefit, this has had a benefit, this has had a benefit, and knitting those things together has created a business benefit. And that's where we should be doing the evaluation piece, not filling in happy sheets.
Yeah, so in fact, I would say happy sheets are not just irrelevant, they're actually counterproductive. Okay. They create a completely false sense of value and worth that is really taking you down a path that is a very, very damaging path. I would say stop them now. Would you agree? Completely. Stop doing them.
Somebody comes to me and tells me that 95% of people are happy with their delivery. Yeah. I question that immediately.
Yeah, exactly. It's ridiculous.
Meaningless.
Okay, so let's talk about the strategy now. Let's see where we've got to. We've got to engaging with the business. We've got to not going away and writing something down all in isolation, but having something that is emergent, is growing, evolving, developing with the organization. We've got some measures which are external, not about whether people like it. It's about whether the learning is effective, but then it's all about the impact of it. So how would you begin to convince the rest of the organization that this process is useful, that it's worth engaging with, and that you want to communicate around it?
Pilot everything.
Yeah.
In the first instance. Pilots never fail. Pilots just have degrees of success. So find somebody in your organization who's willing to pilot something for you and start small. Don't start big. You're not going to be able to change everything straight away. And try dozens and dozens of different pilots until you have enough narrative to be able to say, we did this here, did this here, did this here, did this here, and to demonstrate how these things are changing. And it will happen through natural selection, for want of another word. Somebody will do something which will work and they will tell their peers. And then they will come to the L&D function and say, you know you did that over there, can I have some of that too, please? And so do it, start small in the first instance. This isn't a big bang approach to things. So start small, and the other one is get those people to say stuff about it, work out loud, use the making things open, get people to share the things that they're doing. So it's not just a conversation between the business and the L&D function, it's a conversation between the business and everybody else, and the L&D is part of that conversation.
That's the way it should be. Yeah. So can I bring up the C word? I haven't brought it up yet. That's culture. And my little phrase, which I trip out whenever I feel like it, which is that culture eats strategy for breakfast. Do you agree with that?
Culture can limit things happening. Will the strategy defeat it? Arguably, at some point it can do. As much as anything else, if you can't change the people, management team can always change the people. So, if I have people who choose not to do something, after a certain period of time through managing, then we can choose not to have them in the organisation. I think the culture issue is much more about L&D's maturity. So the maturity of the learning development function. How long have they been there? How long have they been in post? How long have they been doing what they do? How new is their thinking? Where are they working? How are they capturing new ideas? And actually, for any learning development professional, that's the place to start. Look internally at the team in the first instance and say, what do we do? How are we doing it? And are we mature enough as a group of people to think about doing things differently? Yeah,
but also you can see that L&D can be an amazingly important component part of any kind of cultural change program. And to be honest, I can't see how you can successfully evolve or radically change the culture of an organization where learning has nothing whatsoever to do with it. But that involves learning having to change its culture. Yeah. So there's kind of cultures within cultures within cultures.
Yeah, it's very much the capability issue. It's the capacity of the organization and it's the ability of the individuals. Yeah. And it's also the capacity of the team and the abilities that exist within that team as well. But I think the key word for me is about that maturity of learning and development. Do we have a maturity in order to be able to do things differently? If we're not willing to do things differently, well, you do what you've always done, you will get what you've always got.
Sure. But a lot of what you said is actually quite scary. You know, it's quite a long and complicated journey. You're taking people maybe from a degree of certainty to uncertainty, from a degree of perceived security to a degree of perceived insecurity. So how are you going to reassure people and say it's actually worth doing rather than digging your heels in and hiding around the corner until they find you out?
Unfortunately, I can't give any good news on that because bottom line is your organizations will learn differently anyway. My 13-year-old son goes online and plays Minecraft. So what he's doing, he's resource analyzing, he's objective setting, he's networking, peer-to-peer relationships, and he's doing that on a computer game, and he's 13. In 5 years' time, he'll be an employee. And so he was already built and he's coded to learn this way. He's already coded to perform this way. He does exactly the same thing within his school and he will expect to do the same in business. Your learning and development function will not be relevant in 5 years' time if you think that you can't change. We have to be able to support the nature of how our new employees are going to learn. Our current employees are already doing this stuff. You know, said to somebody, you need to learn something on Excel. They will look it up on YouTube and they will work it out for themselves. People are already doing that. The people who aren't are the people who we assume need our support. And if our L&D function continues to work with those people, then our relevance becomes more diminished.
Yeah. So, you know, if we take Jacobs Jr. and imagine him 5 years ahead, he's going to want, in many ways, a learning development function that gets out of the way, that gives him the resources, helps him with goals, maybe in direction, but essentially clears off and lets him get on with it. Is that right?
Exactly. He's going to want to go to a function that says that he can say, how do I? And we have a range of options which we think are relevant. We can prioritize them in a way that we think would work for him, but ultimately he needs to have that autonomy in order to choose which he wants. And he will make that choice with his line manager under obviously the guidance of what learning development can put together. Our role is about connecting and networking and putting people together to make that happen. It's not about creating. This is the idea of curation and curating content and curating ideas for people, not creating new things anymore.
So you're optimistic? Do you think there's a world where L&D disappears along with, you know, the Taylorian process managers with stopwatches and clipboards?
No.
It's part of history?
No, learning development will stay, but it will be different in terms of the skills that are required. Like I said, it's a curation mentality, not about creating new things, although that will create new things in its own, but it was about changing the innovation in learning from innovating from a central function to allowing the organisation to innovate. Yeah. And the learning development function's role would then be to capture all the new things the organisation's doing and then share them and spread them.
Yeah, so a curation and I would argue conversation kind of attitude. You need to get out there, not sit in your little whatever you got, your little corner, but get out there and start talking to people. Have lots and lots and lots and lots of conversations. So you actually know what you're talking about. You understand what drives the place. Is that fair enough?
Entirely. I work in a council. There's 1,000 services that we offer. I don't know every service inside out, but how can I have relevance unless I can talk to the business in the terms that the business understands?
Yeah. What are you up to? You're up to about 463?
There or there.
But what we're saying is that, therefore, the strategy emerges from those conversations. It's not necessarily written, it certainly isn't written in tablets of stone, it might be written down, but it's not in tablets of stone. Yeah. It's shared, co-created by the business, validated certainly by the business, not exclusively owned by L&D. And the success of it will be based on not just L&D, but on how the organization responds, backs it. It needs the line manager, 100% in support of it all, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Am I right? You agree with me on that?
Absolutely. That's exactly it.
So someone's coming with another question here. You stated that it's time to talk capability. So can we kill off competency once and for all?
Yeah, why don't we? What does competency, mean? Competency is a standard that we set as an organisation in terms of how people should behave. It limits innovation and it drives people to a minimum performance level. It's what I call LCD, lowest common denominator form of performance management. You take people down to what the lowest level is, which is the competency level. And to be competent at something, I'm competent at tying my shoelaces. Woo, go me. It doesn't have any meaning or value. How do I exceed competency?
And competency, just because you can do it, doesn't mean you will do it. Capability is about attitude, motivation, empowerment, as well as competency.
Capability is the ability piece. Do I have the skill? And the capacity piece, do I have the breadth and the depth in order to be able to make that happen?
That's an absolutely fantastic point to end. Andrew Jacobs, thanks very much for talking to me.
You're very welcome.
Thank you.